We're live again on Unicorn Dispatch Live with your hosts, founder and CEO of SCYTHE, Bryson Bort. I am joined by Pierre-David Oriol, who gets to set the Unicorn Dispatch Live record for the longest to book guest. Pierre-David and I first started to talk about putting this episode on about a year ago. So here we are. We know even more than we did then. So that's the good news that everyone gets the benefit from. But in the meantime, Pierre-David, if you could introduce yourself to the fine folks at home and what mistakes in life led you to being stuck here on this webcast with me.
Yeah, mistakes indeed. Lots were made. Thanks for letting me join this stream. I really appreciate it. So my entire career has been mostly in cybersecurity. Started roughly 20 years ago. I worked, as a security advisor, analyst, whatever the term was back then, and ultimately, co-created an event called NorthSec here in Montreal. So I'm from Montreal, with friends, and over that we met. We decided that we kind of wanted to, make some changes in cybersecurity. So we created a company at the time called Delve. And that company worked in the vulnerability management space, risk-based vulnerability management space before it existed, or kind of through its existence, I would say. Got acquired by Dell SecureWorks, and then with our experience, we kind of wanted to change things a little bit and try to make a bigger impact. And so we started looking at what's out there, who's the adult in the room when we're talking about cybersecurity, and obviously insurance came into play. And so that's what I do now. I started a new company called Inscora, and we worked with MSPs to help them understand how they can position cyber insurance with their customers and existing brokers. So that's what we do. So my career is really cybersecurity, tons of mistakes, worked at a startup, didn't learn any lessons, started another one. That's how things goes.
So one of the things that I like about is, one, you're a founder in the space. I love founders because founders really have to put their money where their mouth is, literally, with whatever they're doing with the problem. And that you aren't an actuarial nerd, right?
I'm not.
You're not. So most folks, when we really talk about the nuts and bolts of cyber insurance, we're talking to the data science nerds who never really get much information, because you pretty much have the insurance companies who have proprietary actuarial data that they're basing these things off of. They are conservative companies, so they're not really pushing the envelope on this stuff. I think the best metaphor I ever heard from one of those insurance nerds a few years ago said, the reason we never have to change is it's like playing Russian roulette with 10,000 chambers. I was like, what? He's like, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that something's bad's going to happen. Those aren't enough odds to shift essentially how we algorithmically accommodate that. And then you have then the cyber risk quantification side of all of this, which is really trying to apply a clunky math down into risk management, of which insurance is the ultimate fallback for. But that doesn't work so well either. So with all of that being said, Pierre-David, let's get started on the insurance conversation from a cybersecurity founder's perspective.
Yeah, I think so. One of the initial discussions that we had, or the discussions plural, were with friends of us, CISOs, and their experience with cyber insurance. And I think this kind of bubbled up the distance that exists, and still to this day, between what companies and security practitioners do and think they do that makes them more secure, might be making them more secure, and what actually matters for insurance companies. And I think that's kind of the realization that we had, is there's this gigantic divide. Even though we're looking at roughly the same kind of controls or parameters, there's this gigantic divide that exists between these two industries, and these two industries intersect over cyber insurance. So there should be some commonalities, and so there are, but it's really, really difficult to make sense of all of that. So I think what we've seen, what's interesting is what we've seen over the last few years. Cyber insurance has changed a lot from like a niche product that it was in the end of the 90s, early 2000s, to something very, very popular, 2015s to 2020s. It's now broadly adopted, I would say, for larger companies, right? That have practitioners, that have on-hand experts, because they're kind of able to bridge that gap. They're kind of able to understand, all right, this is the reality of insurers. This is how they see the problem. This is probably what their models, source their data from. And this is what I do, and how do I communicate that efficiently? So I think this, this problem, so to speak, or this distance is this gap is getting bridged for large companies, but it's still very, very wide for SMEs, because they don't have security practitioners that can kind of do the legwork. And so that's kind of where we have spent a lot of energy, is trying to understand, the reality behind the, insurance models or controls that they are asking for, and how we bring these back into a cyber reality and actually implement things that make a difference from a cyber perspective, but also from an insurance perspective. I mean, these two things should overlap, but they don't.
So let's start with, you talked about how cyber insurance began as a niche product in the 1990s, and then somewhere around 2015, that changed.
Ish, yeah.
What changed? Why did it change? And what do you see as the next change coming?
So I think it's a great question. What we've seen is the start of kind of a more data-centric approach to cybersecurity in these years. Right? We started collecting more data. We started sort of having a sense of what the foundations were, and with that data-centric approach, we saw models emerge, and novel approach to risk-based security exists, like what FAIR is doing, et cetera. And I think that fueled, and I'm not a cyber insurance historian, there are much better people out there that have written books on the topic. But what probably started to happen there is this science-backed approach pushed towards an insurance-heavy vision of cybersecurity, I would say. And so that brought cyber insurance into the light, and we started to see insurers offer new products around that, ask more questions, gather more data around it, and we started to see more NGAs, MGUs, so smaller specialized insurer that only specialize in cyber risk, for instance, emerge with solutions that combined cybersecurity and cyber insurance. And so that drove kind of an explosion in that market. Obviously, capital was needed, so there was an influx of capital as well to back these insurance products. Insurance is very much funded by reinsurers, and sometimes, obviously capital markets, but maybe less so in cybersecurity. But in essence, I think that's what these realities converged and made it something more appealing. That being said, I mean, this is true for larger companies, right? Where you have a full security team that knows that at some point they have to, they have to transition, they have to offload that risk that they can't necessarily fully address, right? They have to transfer a portion of the risk that they can't address with tools. But for SMBs today, I think this is still largely untapped. I mean, the market penetration of cyber insurance in SMBs in the US is something like 17%, and even worse in Canada. So I think there's still a portion of the equation that is unknown.
So what do we do to help the SMBs? You said only 17% are covered. That doesn't work. And I mean, that doesn't work, right? And furthermore, it's kind of we're all affected by that, right? And I think we know this, but I don't think most folks have connected the dots. If you have been hearing since Log4j about supply chain security, well, that's supply chain resilience. Insurance is what enables a provider to afford to recover from an incident. It's going to affect them making money. So they really need that insurance to come through. And so if you're a large company that rests on these, well, guess what? You're depending on that resilience. So insurance and the lack of it affects you directly, just not from the security perspective. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, so you're tapping in obviously third-party risk, right? I think that's kind of the new. I mean, in cyber insurance, it feels like it's the new hot topic, where companies are starting to realize that there's codependence for their operations. And so that's also a factor that came into play to make cyber insurance more popular, is that companies started to being required to have insurance by their business partners, their funders, et cetera, et cetera. And so it became a sort of a good governance practice. But now, this obviously doesn't permeate in the SMB world. And so how do we get to solve that is a complex problem. I don't think anyone has a clear path to success there, partly because the knowledge about cybersecurity is needed to understand why you should have cyber insurance. You need to understand, what it means to be cyber secure, what you can do and what you cannot do, and what risk you need to be able to transfer. I mean, you need to have a risk understanding, right? And so cybersecurity teams at large companies have that knowledge, or ultimately, good CISOs have that knowledge and understand these metrics, et cetera. But SMBs rely on managed service providers to do the legwork for them. And so far, I mean, that's been something that is not necessarily accessible to MSPs to offer to their customers. That's not a role that they envisioned they had. It's a discussion that you are used to have with your broker. You talk insurance with your broker, but you don't necessarily talk insurance with your service provider. And so that's I think, that's our perspective, is kind of, this is part of the challenge for SMBs, but there are plenty of other problems or challenges to tackle when it comes to business codependence.
So that crosses into what you're doing at Inscora.
It does, yeah. And I don't want this to be a pitch for what it is that we do.
This is your shot. Tell us what you're doing. I don't think founders talking about what they do there's a reason you're doing it, which means it's needed. So don't worry about the salesmanship.
No, I'm trying to,
tell us, go for it.
Your stream. I'm not trying to sell anything. It's just that we feel that the problem is there, and the solution has to come from MSPs. That's our perspective. Our perspective is the unlocking, the cornerstone of having success or making cyber insurance, successful with SMBs goes through MSPs. There's a collaboration that is needed between brokers that sell insurance and MSPs, of course.
Why?
Because obviously, MSPs in the US and in Canada aren't necessarily allowed to sell insurance if they're not a registered broker. So you absolutely need to have.
Let's back up. Why is the MSSP your view as the go-to-market channel for SMB?
Yeah. So the MSP for SMBs is in charge of telling them what they ought to be doing in cybersecurity, right? That's their role, their responsibility.
I think we're even overstating it. They don't even tell them what to do. Most folks write the check, the MSSP does it, and they're just like, set it and forget it.
I mean, so your business is not about cybersecurity. Your business is about building widgets, right? Yep. But to build these widgets, you need to have an IT infrastructure that needs to be secured. I'm not teaching anybody anything there, but the idea is that you give that contract to someone else, a managed service provider, managed security service provider, what have you, MSPs or MSSPs. And so these folks are in charge of telling you or doing whatever's needed to make you secure so that your business is resilient. That includes security products, right? That includes, antivirus, firewall, securing your emails, making sure you can't have business email compromise, MFA everywhere, blah, blah, blah. That also should include some cyber risk transfer element. And so that's, where, we see, a potential is that MSPs aren't necessarily tooled to have that discussion with their customers. And so we feel that it's part of the solution to getting SMBs cyber insured is having that discussion with the MSP.
Okay. So the MSSP is for SMB is pretty much the only cybersecurity connection they have.
Yeah.
That's the starting point. So from a founder, I'm allergic to cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah. Aren't we all?
Actually, we are, which is why SMBs have this kind of relationship with who's my nerd. From For the MSP, that's usually I'm hiring somebody to manage my IT. I also apparently need cybersecurity. Cool, whatever. If I'm slightly bigger, then I might have a dedicated MSSP on top of my IT provider. But most of these relationships are check, I've got that. I don't know what they do, but supposedly I'm getting the cyber, I'm good to go. So from a addressable market perspective, it makes sense that that's your only connection in on cybersecurity. So cybersecurity, of course, is, as I was joking in the headline there, is, breaking news, you need to secure it. So we need to secure it. And then you mentioned risk transfer. So the fallback plan, the whole reason we have insurance is businesses already are familiar with commercial and general liability, errors and omissions, right? We have all these different kinds of liability insurances. Cybersecurity is just yet another one that I need, because from a risk mitigation perspective, I need the ultimate, no matter what, I got something, right? If everything failed technically, none of my employees have any clue how to defend themselves, which is your average SMB. At least I have the financial ability to survive the mistake, or calling it a mistake, the attack. Let's not call it a mistake. I don't want to.
The attack. I mean, you're a victim there. You're not,
you're a victim. Yeah, thank you. You're the victim, right? Fuck those guys. We're the victims, right? So what are the common mistakes you see and also just a statistic for folks, there are about 32 to 33 million small businesses in the United States. One of the themes that I've been talking about for years, for those who've listened to me, is the fact that too much of the cybersecurity conversation writ large is focused on the top small percent, right? We talk about in the world about the top 1% in our economy. Well, these businesses are the 0.0001%, and then everybody else is that SMB category fundamentally. They're small and kind of too small to effectively do anything with cybersecurity. So what are the common mistakes or misunderstandings you see with these customers, and what have been your challenges beyond MSPs not being natural underwriters or brokers for
brokers?
this?
Yeah. So I think it's this disconnect between what you think you ought to be doing as a business to be cyber secure, or to implement the good foundational elements of cybersecurity, and what actually matters when there's a cyber incident, or the signals that exist out there. And I don't think there's any of these two let's call it these two circles that are the absolute truth. I think there's a portion of truth in each of these. And so what I think is difficult is understanding for SMBs, it's understanding what the perspective of insurers are and what they see in terms of claims. If you look at the data that insurers put out there, and they do, and I don't think a lot of cyber professionals actually take a good look at this data, because it would teach them a lot of things. But if you look at the data that is out there, that is put out there by insurers, and folks like well, I know I said insurers, and I'm going to name Marsh, and Marsh is a broker, not an insurer, although they own insurance, but whatever. But Coalition, Resilience, etc. These MGAs that specialize on cyber. If you look at the data, you'll see what exactly they pay for, and you'll see what the source of incidents were. And so you go from hearsay or rumor or whatever's cool out there, the hype that we all hear about, and these new agentic threat, whatever, to actual payouts. What the claims were linked to. And so what the elements that you should be put in place are. And so there are there's plenty of data out there. There are plenty of publications and reports from these agencies. And I would encourage businesses to go out there and look for these. So Marsh, for instance, has kind of semi-formalized 12 critical controls or essential controls. I don't remember exactly how they call these, of cyber insurance, basically the elements that cyber insurers absolutely want to see. And they have looked at the signal to noise ratio for these controls and went into great length to kind of detail, all right, if you have this in place, depending on the type of, let's say MFA, depending on the type of MFA, this is the potential impact that it would have on your claims. It's a model, like it's not perfect, but it is still interesting for businesses to see. Thanks. That's a great link. So there's a signal to noise study out there that is even more interesting, because you can actually see the percentile and the spread of every single control. And you'll see, for instance, that employee training has probably the most impact or the most signal to noise ratio, but the spread is very high between good performers and bad performers. And so it's really interesting to see that there are elements that make a difference, but you can also be very wrong in implementing them, and so actually not make a big difference.
All right, so we got the top 12 from there. And I like that, the discussion on the signal to noise ratio and all this stuff, because that's what I see as the overall SMB problem, right? When we're in this space, it's very easy for us, right? We've seen the years of denigrating the user as the largest risk surface area, which it's true they are, but I always point out it's the security team's fault if a user clicking an email can burn the enterprise to the ground. That's not the user, that's you. So we have that kind of conflict, and sort of the same thing again when we look at these 32 to 33 million small business owners who are just trying to do their best. As you said, they're not specializing in security. That's not the purpose of why they started their company, to make XYZ widget. It's just now a fact of life. And so put yourself in their shoes. Where do I go? What do I do? There's all this noise. There's a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of opinions. And the most common one I get told over and over again is I need to have MFA. I don't know what MFA is. So I'm going to look at my MSP and MSSP to be like, do you do that? Because that's as far as I go. So how do we move beyond that? I mean, is this what it is? Is this what it's going to always be?
So that's a good question. I think, so when you have a business, there's obviously a lot of noise. I mean, and especially in cybersecurity, we're very hype driven. Like, we all know that. We've all been to RSA, and for those listening to us who haven't been, I mean, I would encourage you to go. It's crazy. It's like the big mess of marketing, and the messages are all over the place. The hype is ever present, and so if you run a business on that hype, it's extremely difficult to make sense of what you have to do that moves the needle and what is noise. And so that's where you can't, as a CEO of a company, you can't make all the decisions with regards to your cybersecurity yourself. You have to delegate to trusted third parties, which is what they do. But you have to make sure that these trusted third party actually implement things that move the needle. And you document yourself and try to go beyond the hype, because cybersecurity is very, very much hype driven. So I think that's also part of the challenge there.
Yeah, well, hype, I think, is a natural part of it. So, question from Jeffrey: could insurance claims be denied for a cyber attack originated from an unexpected vulnerability exposure, was never detected? So unexpected vulnerability or exposure is either going to be 0 day, right? Because we have an unpublished vulnerability and exploit, or I have an incomplete asset management, vulnerability management solution. So something I should have known, I didn't discover my own environment. So both of those scenarios, what is the deal with insurance claims being denied? And the answer is yes,
so
it can be.
It's always maybe, it depends. And again, I'm not a broker, I'm not an insurer, I'm not a carrier, I'm not an underwriter, actuarial modelist, so I can't answer as an insurance person there, but I can tell you what I've heard and what we've seen and what we know. Most cyber insurers today will, to some extent, scan your perimeter to look for vulnerabilities that they potentially think you have on your machines. Whether that is true or not, they will do it. You have to expect this. Like, that's a given now. It's like the new reality of the cyber insurance market. If they find something, they will likely tell you before sending a policy over, or having you become insured. It might be an issue to get coverage. It might not be an issue to get coverage, and that goes because of the market financial mechanics, and whether or not we're in what's called a soft market, meaning it's easy to get insurance, or a hard market, meaning it's hard to get insurance, and their own appetite for your type of business, your type of security stack, et cetera, et cetera. Just to say that they might, the insurer might already know, and you'd better obviously tell them what you know as well. As to whether, if you had a 0 day and you got breached via a 0 day, will you get covered or not? It really depends on your policy and the agreement you have with your insurer. And I'm not, qualified to answer broadly to that question. What I can say is, they do pay a lot of claims. They obviously, their business is trying to not pay claims. That's not, that the difference between the claims that they pay and the ones that they don't is where they're profitable. But if it's something that was not disclosed previously and it's a 0 day, the chances of them paying is probably pretty reasonable. But it really depends on a case-by-case basis. You, as an individual owning a company, you have to work with your MSP and a trusted broker that knows cyber, preferably a cyber broker or specialized on cyber, to make sure that you represent your risk adequately to the insurer. That the issue is misrepresentation of risk there. Did you say the right things before getting that policy, right? That's the big challenge.
The other one, which is where businesses, and this tends to be larger ones because they actually have the policies defined, is you can also be denied if you are not following your own policies. So, the insurance has these requirements. Some of those flow down. You have your own internal policies on how you meet those requirements or establish your cybersecurity or fraud, because cybersecurity and fraud are adjacent and overlapping. And if you are not in compliance with your own policy, you can also be denied. One of the best examples I've seen on this, because of course, with the rise of AI, we have seen the ability for deepfake technology. Deepfake has been used for business fraud, where somebody, can in real time look exactly like the person on Zoom that they're targeting, have the voice, have all of those things. And I saw a claim that was denied because this one was a faked phone call, and it was faked from the CFO. And the CFO, was like, cut a check to this, and they cut the check. Well, the claim was denied because their own corporate policy had controls that said, this isn't, you can't do that. So, right, it wasn't even a question of a failure to the attack. It was the fact that they didn't follow their own controls policies to stay in compliance. Now, going to this, when we're talking about SMB, to this question, the vulnerability management, exposure management, the monitoring, that's going to be completely on the MSSP to do that, which is where now we're talking about, all right, so we have, again, the technical access point, the cybersecurity point of contact for that SMB really being in the driver's seat. This is where you come in. So how are we negotiating that?
Yeah, and so I think that's the challenge is, businesses are not tooled or equipped well enough to do that analysis work. They rely on a third party to do it because that's the reality of service providers. But these service providers don't necessarily understand the intricacies of cyber insurance, which is the role that brokers traditionally have to do, right? And so there's kind of this this communication channel between these two parties. So you've got the broker that is responsible for kind of shopping around for the best policies for you as a company, whether it's cyber or all the others like E&O, D&O, general liability, et cetera. But you've got the responsibility of the cyber controls that are going to be validated by the insurers to some extent in the hands of your MSP. So how do you tool all these parties so that they can understand your profile and make the best informed decision to getting you the best, cyber policy that exists out there, but also making sure that, when there's an issue, you're actually properly covered and someone can come in and help you fix, help you remediate the breach or and respond to whatever's happening right now, and get you capital. That's the main hurdle is your operations might just stop. Right? You might be just out of business because most of your IT has been ransomware. So how do you pay for someone to come in and fix that thing to get you back on track and lose the minimum amount of money. So that's also the challenge there. So I think this is what we've seen is that the challenge is that it's a role that traditionally is held by one party, but needs the collaboration of another party that doesn't necessarily have ways to do this work properly, and they need to be able to exchange for the benefit of a third party, which is another challenge in itself.
So back to the Marsh critical controls. We posted the link here, the top 12 critical controls. Of course, the top one is MFA, as I was joking. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Are there any on there or not on there that surprise you?
I think it's so, and we can go back to MFA. I mean, not all MFAs are the same. We know this, right? And so what I'm
going to pick on that one because you just raised a great point, right? This is the difference between compliance and security. Compliance says thou shalt have MFA. Okay, multi-factor authentication. I don't really know what that is. Oh, now I know what it is because it's a pain in the ass. Anyone who's ever rolled one out knows the failure rates and the friction to business, blah, blah, blah. But we get past that. Cool, I've got MFA. But as you just noted, it's a little more complicated than that.
It is. And so again, if you look at the data, if you look at the data that Marsh has put out, they have a drill down on the types of MFAs, right? And what kind of MFA actually makes a difference, it has a better signal to noise ratio than other MFA. Things like WebAuthn and phishing resilient MFAs obviously make a huge difference versus SMS or email-based secondary authentication. So some insurers will just ask whether or not you have MFA because they can't automatically validate this, where your MSP could, but they can't. So they'll ask. And some will go to another extent and ask the type of MFA that you have because they know a specific type makes a difference. That's what's hard to understand for businesses is all right, yes, I have MFA. I've just clicked I've checked it on my Microsoft 365 console dashboard. I've enabled MFA, but what kind of MFA have you enabled? Does this make sense? So understanding these intricacies is difficult. And this is just MFA, right? Is one of the 12 critical controls, and it's for insurance, but it's part of a much broader set of controls that we all know about regarding cybersecurity. So each and every one of these, you kind of have to drill down. And some are, I would say, eliminatory. Like let's say if you have a web-based email that is exposed on the perimeter and doesn't have any MFA, it's going to be pretty difficult to get cyber insurance. I don't want to say impossible because, again, I'm not from the insurance world, but these days it's easier, I would say, but it's really, really difficult. It's not going to be the best policy for sure. But some controls are, you can discuss about these, vulnerabilities, depending on the severity, depending on your patching rate. If you do patching, obviously patching is having a proper patch cadence is one of the 12 critical controls, and being able to tackle critical vulnerabilities in a timely manner is part of that. So some vulnerabilities can be discussed and can be, accepted, I guess, by insurers, but it's all in the details, right? That's the tough thing. It's all in the details because insureds don't know, small businesses don't know cybersecurity, obviously don't know the details, and MSPs aren't tooled well enough to explain the details and explain the intricacies between control A being 75% present because of this, and that, and control B being 95% but missing that central piece that actually disqualifies you for insurance.
Yeah, so two of the controls, you mentioned patch and vulnerability management, and then the last one is end of life. And they go together because the whole point of end of life is that I no longer have the support mechanism to ensure I can have a patching cadence. Personally, I get spicy about employee awareness and vulnerability management because the whole reason we have vulnerability management is either insurers or our tier one customer pushes it down as a flow down requirement. And it's a checklist approach. The real point is that I have proper hygiene as a baseline. And then above that I'm executing a proper security critical thinking process, because A vulnerability is not a vulnerability is not a vulnerability. It is contextual. It is unique to me and the instantiation of the vulnerability in context to who I am as an organization, which of course, all of that nuance gets lost in a checklist and mandated vulnerability management. And furthermore, for the SMB market, as we've described, that's going to now be offloaded to an MSSP who is not going to know your business as well. So they can't possibly do the critical process. All we can do is the simple metrics of mean time to resolution, which for all of you at home, there is an entire criminal ecosystem that picks on the fact that the average vulnerability management policy is CVSS 7 or 8.0 and up. You know, what's critical or big, again, by some academic that's not necessarily applied to me. And then the criminal market is like, well, anything under that 6.9 and down is going to still be there. So it doesn't even work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you and because of my past and what I was doing before that new cyber insurance venture of mine, I spent a lot of energy and a lot of time thinking about contextual risk-based prioritization. I mean, that's what we were doing before. And you're absolutely right. A vulnerability, and sometimes people even confuse miscompliance and vulnerability, which is even worse, I think. But whatever. A vulnerability doesn't mean anything if it's taken out of context. And by context, I don't mean filling the two temporal and environmental factors of CVSS, whatever. I mean understanding as a company, what do you care for? Like, what's important to you or not? Is the vulnerability on an asset that your business depends on critically, or is it on some random box somewhere in a corner that nobody ever logs into? I mean, yes, it's a vulnerability, but the two these two instances of the same vulnerability have very different impact for you and a very different risk. And so I think that's that's not yet a thing that we've seen insurers care for. They ask if you have a risk-based management vulnerability policy in place, so kind of assume. But I haven't seen any question about how you execute it, right? Do you, let's say, do you even leverage EPSS, right? Or something like that? Or do you go and look at the CISA KEAV database to remediate vulnerabilities? So again, all the subtleties in every single one of these controls are the hardest part. It's not understanding that the control is easy to kind of grasp quickly, but what exactly matters is really difficult to understand and to implement.
Translating what Pierre-David just said there, EPSS is the exploit predictability scoring system. The idea that I just picked on CVEs as being too simple. EPSS says, well, let's start to statistically map vulnerabilities to what's getting exploited. I believe they're currently on version 3 of that system. You can also pull an API from it for your own data enrichment. And then KEV is known exploitable vulnerabilities. CISA publishes a list of what they're seeing active in the wild. I'd be curious with the challenges that have been happening in CISA in 2025, how well that list is maintained. However, CISA is not farming it in themselves. They're aggregating from multiple industry sources. So I know particularly in operational technology, a lot of asset owners have been very excited about the use of the KEVs because I can at least focus on what's externally being done. So go where the attacker is. In summary, vulnerability management has 2 parts to it. The first, which is what we just described, is the external variable, right? The externalities of who is doing what, because I mean, if nobody's doing it, then it doesn't matter. The second is, as I described earlier, is the internal context. What does a vulnerability mean in context to who I am? So we've got some emerging tech questions lined up here. Go to the first one, also from Jeffrey. So we were talking about artificial intelligence, which means we have an artificial intelligence question. I don't think that we can get away from AI these days. The summary, Jeffrey, like the previous one, is going to be the answer is yes, because they can find all sorts of reasons. That same context that I'm talking about in vulnerability management is the context that an insurance provider is going to be an absolute devil in the details of your policy. Pierre-David.
I mean, so Jeffrey, these are all very good questions. I think that's, your analysis goes much beyond what we typically see in terms of, what causes claims refusal. These are great questions to ask your broker if you are in business with an MSP, your MSP as well. And potentially, the broker will certainly flip this over to your insurer's underwriter. Like that's kind of their job to make a judgment on these types of situations. But these are all good questions. But I can't provide a definitive answer for these. It's very possible that depending on the source of the breach, the claims gets denied or gets refused. But in the case of a specific company or a specific scenario, I mean, that's a good question for your broker. I'm not sure they're going to have a good answer for you, but at least, they can pass the question over to the insurer and have them raise eyebrows if you want to. Maybe you don't. I don't know.
So first of all, it's going back to what I said earlier. It's going to be a policy question. Obviously, the insurance company is going to be looking for what are you doing about proprietary data staying within your perimeter? Because that's fundamentally what it is I am putting proprietary data, in this case, potentially credentials, out into an open SaaS platform, which is trading on my data. Yep. So it's going to most likely come down to policy and controls. NIST, and you're rarely going to hear me compliment NIST. In this case, I will. NIST put out a fantastic document a couple of years ago on the AI risk management framework, AI 100-1 or 1-100. It is well written. And for any of you who are interested, if you ever want to hear me talk about AI and policy, that's something I teach. And I have a very simple metaphor here, which I'm not going to go into, but I'm going to titillate on the racist soap dispenser, which helps you build the proper governance for AI in your enterprise. Okay, what about post-quantum cryptography, PQC, and cyber insurance? Has cyber insurance started looking at that quantum governance problem?
So, I mean, there are a lot of innovations that happen in the insurtech insurance space. Let me preface by that, right? That being said, the insurance business is the business of managing risk. And one thing that they're good at is managing innovation risk. And so that means that it's not a ship that moves really fast. I'm using the ship analogy here, wink, wink, Lloyd's. But it's these new elements, just like, cyber, again, we said that cyber insurance became popular in 2015. Cybersecurity had existed for a while before it became an insurance product. So, cryptography or PQC, post-quantum crypto, is not necessarily a thing that we see a lot of questions asked around. Okay, and I'm sourcing my data from every single engagement that we've had with a carrier and a broker, where we had to fill questions and analyze questionnaires of carriers. We've seen more than 5,000-6,000 questions of carriers. We've analyzed all of that, and I haven't seen a question in there relating to PQC. So I don't think it's a big element that they're looking at. Just like AI, and AI is much, much broader and much more prevalent, but it's, they're starting to look at, AI insurability. There's, discussions are happening around that. I'm not sure there are any insurance products around that, and whether or not it'll be a standalone product or part of a cyber product or an E&O product. But they're starting to look at it because it's so big and so unavoidable. PQC, I don't think they even mention it in the questions that they ask you. And some of my background that I haven't talked about, and I'm sorry for that because I should have brought this in the intro, but I used to do cryptography, right, in financial institutions, practical crypto, not theoretical crypto. So actually, key management, key distribution, where the rubber meets the road, right? There's like the theoretical problems, but then there's a practical problems to distributing keys and whatnot. So again, I think I haven't seen any question on traditional crypto in these questionnaires. So let alone PQC, I don't think it's a big concern today. Why? Because if you look at claims from their point of view, insurers, if they look at claims, if they look at the source of claims, 80% of the claims that they tackle are business email compromise, financial fraud, and ransomware. None of that can be really alleviated using PQC. So that's kind of their reality. If PQC becomes a big issue, if we start seeing, I don't know, breaches because you didn't have the right set of keys at the right place, then it'll start becoming a question. But it's more often than not, it's a lagging indicator more than a leading indicator when you look at insurance questionnaires. So, but again, right now it's not a big issue.
So I'm going to translate some things there.
Sorry about that. I just went off on a...
No. You're a practitioner. I'm here to help translate into Army English, which is my level. I can count to 3. Oh, I should have done a better joke. I can count to 3.
Okay.
So first of all, he talked about practical versus theoretical cryptography. If you've ever heard "don't roll your own crypto," first is trying to develop your own algorithm. I don't know most people who can do that, but they do try to take what they think is an algorithm and roll it themselves so that they have a deployment and use mechanism, the operational part of cryptography, which, by the way, is most of the time where cryptography fails, because that's hard to do, right? I need true secrets. I need true randomization. Any pattern matching there is how all crypto fails. And again, for those of you who have a hacking background, you can kind of guess how easy it is to work around these crypto nerds who think that they've engineered something perfectly. Well, we come and hack the shit out of it because it isn't as perfect as it sounds. You also brought up a really good point on why we have a challenge with insurance, right? We talked about, and I hinted at the actuarial science behind that. Well, in the definition of it means we've collected data to inform an opinion, which means insurance is always going to be lagging what's happening in the market. And you gave the 3 most common examples of the kinds of claims we see in insurance today. But here's the challenge. The quantum problem is a unique one for what the industry is facing. So to bring everyone up to speed, what the problem is that there is going to be a future state via quantum computing where we'll have supercomputing capabilities at a level that we've never had before, which means we can crack anything. And so for many of you who roll your eyes at hearing quantum, which I used to until last year, is the fact that this is a lot closer than we realize. And we are already seeing threat behaviors that are currently harvesting, it's called harvesting now, decrypt later, HNDL, that are currently exfiltrating your sensitive data that is encrypted. And they know that they will not be able to decrypt it now, but they are storing it for a future state where they will be able to decrypt it as these capabilities come online. The current estimate for when these threat capabilities are going to come online is about 3 years. So in roughly 3 to 5 years, all of the secrets that we've been transmitting are going to be broken. So the question is, how do we start to establish a post-quantum cryptography to be able to be prepared to defeat that? Now, your average SMB is going to be like, I'm going to be depending on whatever my provider is giving me. If Microsoft gives it to me, if Google gives it to me, then I'm cool. But that's not really going to help you because, of course, they're also going to be lagging in the push of going back to market. So I think for the SMBs, you are very much going to be just following what you get. Again, going back to the MSP, MSSP channel service that they get, that's where it will be if. For the large companies, though, I think this is directly in line, and they need to start preparing now because their data is being stolen now. That falls into this problem. Now, here's the thing again. That's going to be, how do I make that claim, right? How do I make the claim that my data got stolen, it was encrypted, but 5 years from now, I'm going to have a real pain point from that? You can't. I mean, the insurance market isn't built for that.
Yeah, well, in the past, that's the challenge. Is you're going to have to make a claim for data that was stolen, hopefully while you were covered by insurance, and if you're still covered, obviously, so that's definitely going to be a challenge. The solution, I mean, there's it's a twofold, it's a kind of a twofold problem or twofold solution to that problem. The first is don't collect the data that you don't need to collect. Like that's,
So
you're not going to lose the data.
It starts with data retention, right? If I don't have it,
starts with data, not even retain, but data capture. Like capture only what you need to work, and don't over capture, because ultimately it might get breached or leaked or whatever. Then on the crypto problem itself, I think the problem of quantum crypto, and I'm not a quantum cryptographic expert by any means, but the issue there, I think, is kind of recognized. Like people understand, the powers that be understand what ought to be done and how we can transition there. And I think there's going to be a transition. Is it going to be smooth? I don't know, but it certainly is going to be better than the transition to memory safe code or something like that. It's like we've used this cryptography for years. Like we had potentially we did put asbestos everywhere over a certain period of time, and we now have to remove all that asbestos, but we didn't know before, and so it's like it's become an issue. It's become a critical thing to do. For crypto, we actually know in advance, so we can start by start rolling out these new quantum resilient algorithm in time to protect what matters most. So financial transactions, secure exchanges, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's so these two things: don't overly collect data, and start transitioning as soon as you can. Be on the lookout for new cryptographic standards, and talk with your service providers to actually have them in place. I mean, it's a good discussion to have, even though it's we're a bit ahead of time.
Okay, so we're coming up on time here. What are the final thoughts that you would like to leave the audience? Whoop. I'm sorry, just saw another comment come in. Even more. Hold on, we'll just start throwing these up. So very interesting point about the time-shifted breach impact damage just stemming from a HNDL post-quantum attack. Back to Dr. Rossini. I was inquiring per the harvest now decrypt later risk, the now risk of post-quantum cryptography. I would hope insurance companies are not waiting around for the decryption to happen before addressing PQC when it's too late. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this with the fact that they're inherently going to be a lagging response, both because they follow claims and they follow the data, as opposed to being proactive.
Yeah.
And that's also culturally how insurance providers are.
There are going to be lawsuits.
Yeah, we have seen some attempts at disruption in the market. That's why At Bay and Coalition are examples of insurance startups. Again, Pierre-David has put himself into that mix with Inscora, focusing on the SMB side of the market. Anything in this you want to add to?
No, I think we covered it a bit, and a lot of the decisions. Not a lot of some decisions, from insurers obviously stem from real cases. So there has to be a case of someone making a claim, being denied, and then this goes to court, and ultimately it gets decided there, and this becomes the new reality, and that becomes the new way of doing insurance, and that becomes maybe a new question that they have to ask, etc. Maybe the very first ones are going to be the claims are going to be paid for, and maybe over time it's going to change. But again, it's a very good question, but I don't think it's not an element that we've seen or heard being talked about in insurance circles. Certainly some circles, but maybe not broadly. And it's certainly not as part of the questions that the insurers are asking today when they ask about the things that you're doing internally to get you a better policy or not. I don't think I've ever seen that question in the thousands that I've seen. I don't think I've ever seen that question being asked, even though it's a good question. And that, again, that's like we talked about this disconnect between cyber world and insurance world. That's a canonical example of that. Like, we know it's an issue. We know technically why it's an issue. It affects data. It will affect data in the future. That's an absolute certainty. But for now, it's not part of the claims because 80% are not that, are something else. And so, yeah.
All right. So final thoughts and words you would like to leave with the audience.
So again, I think, and I'm not an insurer, but cyber insurance is a product that exists. I think a lot of SMBs ought to benefit from cyber insurance. I hope that, it's a thing that people can take out of this exchange. It is useful. Risk transfer is part of a healthy cybersecurity program. It includes all the other things, but also that. And again, there are ways to go around the hype of cybersecurity. If you look at the data that insurers publish, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at this data regularly, because they do publish yearly reports. We're all used to seeing the Verizon reports and whatnot. Look at the insurers. What are the claims for? Maybe that'll help folks rationalize their approach to securing themselves, and what actually makes a difference when an incident happens. For claims and the money that you have to disperse to actually continue operating. So that's kind of, I'm trying to bridge the gap here between these two worlds.
I think you did a great job of bridging the gap. So well done there.
Thanks.
Pretty good for a crypto nerd, not being too nerdy. I think that deserves a round of applause there. And for those of you who looking for more Unicorn Dispatch Live, we will be back on March 5th with John Stoner, who does cyber threat intelligence at Google and also helps run the Veterans Cybersecurity Conference, VetSecCon. So stay tuned, and good to see you again, my friend.
Thanks a lot.